I expect more targeted discussions in the next phase of the Forward Singapore exercise, all towards co-creating solutions. At the same time, government policies will be updated based on the feedback and ideas already given. And for more on the Forward Singapore exercise, we're joined by Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the SMU School of Law. Oh, Professor Tan, we just heard from DPM Lawrence Wong. 14,000 Singaporeans across more than 140 sessions joined this Forward Singapore exercise. What's your assessment on progress so far?
Well, I think this consultation is very much on an accelerated process. It's 6 months into the whole exercise, and we expect the whole consultation to conclude, in the second half of this year. I think in the midst of the pandemic, to have close to 140 sessions, 14,000 Singaporeans taking part, I think that's something which, which some might say maybe a bit on the low side, but I think it does indicate, that Singaporeans are still pretty engaged. And I think what is happening now is that there are more avenues, for Singaporeans to express their concerns. But I think, if you ask me for the assessment, I think it's really how the whole consultation process brings people from different walks of life, together in a safe space, being able to speak honestly about their aspirations, their fears, their concerns, as we saw in the stories earlier in this bulletin. I think the real challenge is, how do we address, all these competing or perhaps sometimes even conflicting interests and concerns. And I don't think the solution is to try to trade off one concern against another, right? But to try to see how we could be as inclusive as we can be. I think for me, another aspect of the assessment would be, I think the views expressed so far, as you could see from the progress update report that was released earlier today, I don't think many of the views are unexpected. So I think the challenge then becomes, how do we deal with these ground concerns that have been articulated or felt for a period of time? Because I think the view would be that we need to go beyond just talking and actually being able to get things done. And hopefully, we'll see that coming to reality, in the second stage of the consultation.
Prof, the fact that these conversations have taken place during the pandemic, I think maybe that's what sets it apart as well, because Singaporeans, for the most part, feeling very alone and needing support together, really. Many people had a tough time during the pandemic as well. So, income disparities and so on, it really was in a lot of our faces too, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely, right? I think when you think about the pandemic, how it made most, if not all of us, reassess our priorities in life. It made us more aware of what is it that truly matters to each of us, not just as an individual or a family, but perhaps even as a country. So I would say that, the pandemic, provides that very good juncture, right, for us to reassess where we want to go, as we chart, the next lap of Singapore's development, right, and progress as a nation.
Forward Singapore, we've heard it has 6 pillars. They go towards reinforcing, recreating our social compact here in Singapore. And of course, the usual things that come up with that: employment, social mobility, social inequality. I wouldn't say we are going to change on account of Forward Singapore. I think Singapore is constantly changing to try to improve, for example, more progressive taxation, to encourage social mobility, to make sure we have as much equality as is possible in essentially a meritocratic society. Which policies do you actually see changing significantly as a result of these conversations in the months ahead?
Well, I think when you look at the different pillars, right, ranging from health, to the environment, to identity, economy, and jobs, I think there is the expectation, and I believe the 4G leaders would very much also want, to demonstrate that policies that have served us well, in the past decades, they may not be fit for purpose as society evolves and becomes a lot more complex. So I think, policies need to evolve, and we saw that extended debate in Parliament, on Monday and Tuesday over housing, right? Something which we all take for granted, but I think it demonstrates, the sort of expectations that are there. So when we look at Singapore, over the last 25 years, or in the first 25 years, it was really about molding success. The last 20 years was really about the management of success, and I think when we look at, issues like employment, social mobility, and inequality, I think it speaks to remaking success. How do we as a society re-envision what it means to be successful, for individuals, for an organization, as well as for the country as a whole. So I would say that, on all these issues, where Singaporeans have expressed significant concerns, I think there is a need, for many of the existing policies, to be re-looked at, from top to bottom, and for sacred cows to be slayed. So I would say, for example, employment. The concern with whether employment is enabling us to continue to enjoy, a life of purpose and meaning, and being able to achieve, whatever economic goals that we may have. The concern with, society becoming perhaps somewhat socially immobile. I think that's, again, another one which requires very concerted action. So I would say that, in all the different pillars, if we talk about strengthening the social compact, there must be the need, to really do that thorough review and to re-envision, what it means to be successful, as a society in all these different pillars.
I think the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong is leading the charge with these conversations is also what's significant here. Do you think perhaps that there need to be more avenues, especially for the young people of Singapore, some toolkit or training programs or something for them to be able to share in conversations like this in a more meaningful way?
Definitely, Don. I think, we cannot wait for this once in a decade, national conversation. That's not to say that, we don't have consultations in between. But I think, in a way, a sort of a thorough re-examination of who we are, how we're going to get to where we hope to be. I think, the younger generation, or even people of my generation, people in their 50s, would certainly want to have that ability, to be able to put forth our views, and the government talks about co-creating. But this is not a new concept, right? I think during the term of Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong, it was already raised, but I think we now need to bring it into reality. So it's not just about co-creating policy solutions, but also in implementation, right? And I think the Forward Singapore exercise can only succeed, if we see it as a movement, right, in which each and every one of us have the agency, to be able to make a change. And I think this is what is important, as we enter the next phase, of our nation building, and coming out of, the pandemic.
Professor Tan, thank you very much for coming into the studios and sharing your perspectives with us on the progress that we're at with Forward SG.
Thank you.
We've been speaking there to Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the SMU School of Law.